It is often said that the wheels of justice turn slowly. Unfortunately, this passivity can come at too high a cost for those simply seeking protection. In today's tragic case, the price was a human life. Jennifer Paulson was born in Tacoma, Washington, USA on June 23, 1979. She was the daughter of Kenneth and Nancy Paulson, who built a very close-knit family. The home was always filled with harmony and warmth. Jennifer had two brothers with whom she was close. She was a kind-hearted child who loved everything around her, easily made friends, and had a wide circle of acquaintances. She knew how to connect with anyone, even if they were eccentric or reserved. She could accept them and form friendships, revealing their best qualities. Jennifer, or Jenny, as her close ones called her, graduated from Christian Academy in 1998. From an early age, she stood out for her academic achievements, graduating with honors every year. This allowed her photo to always be displayed on the school's honor board. Jennifer excelled in even the most difficult subjects, dedicating herself fully to projects and solving any challenges. At the same time, she was always willing to help her classmates who struggled with certain topics. However, her life was not only about academics. Jennifer was also very active in extracurricular activities. She published the school news every week, worked as a tutor, and played volleyball, basketball, and softball. A significant characteristic of her personality, like that of her family as a whole, was a strong faith, which she turned to for support. The family were members of the local church and attended services every Sunday. After graduation, Jennifer attended Seattle Pacific University, located about an hour's drive from her parents' home. There, she aimed to become a teacher, combining academic success with helping the community. At university, she continued to excel, earning a bachelor's degree in special education, followed by a master's degree in teaching. Simultaneously, Jennifer was actively involved in volunteer work, helping low-income families in the city. She paid particular attention to helping children apply for college. Jennifer always considered education to be the most important priority in life, as it would allow her to build her future. After graduating from university, she decided to begin her career. Her first job was as a substitute teacher in Pierce County schools. Jennifer did not plan to stop there, so she worked hard to secure a permanent position. It didn't take long before she was invited to teach at several schools, which allowed her to become a full-time teacher in 2004 at Hante Middle School and Stanley Elementary School. In 2007, Jennifer became a teacher at Byrne Elementary School, where she took on children with special needs. She became a beloved fifth-grade teacher. The children were drawn to her because she could approach each student individually. She believed that anyone could have a chance at a better future if they received the right support. This, she felt, was the true calling of a teacher. She worked with students who faced serious challenges. Even in fifth grade, some of her students still couldn't read. Jennifer's schedule was always extremely busy with work and helping the children. It seemed that she wasn't particularly concerned about romantic relationships. She was either too busy or simply not ready for a serious relationship. In any case, Jennifer didn't spend her time on that. During her university years in the spring of 2002, Jennifer worked part-time in the campus cafeteria. It was here that she crossed paths with a student who had recently transferred from another institution and also worked in the cafe. The guy's name was Jed Waits. He was an entirely ordinary young man. Everyone who knew him well couldn't say anything negative about him. One notable aspect of Jed that stood out to those who didn't know him well was his strange style of dress. It was rather gloomy. He typically wore black, but his friends attributed his affinity for all things dark to some creative eccentricity. Since his early years, Jed had been artistic, and he got involved in extracurricular activities. He acted in plays, drew cartoons for the school newspaper and yearbook, and enjoyed making posters and leaflets for a youth group. He had a real talent for the arts, especially visual arts. Jed would instantly come up with the most unusual creative projects and execute them very quickly. This allowed him to organize events in no time, which made him well-liked among the teachers. Additionally, he was the leader of the church's youth group and even met with students once a month to discuss spiritual topics in Scripture. Jed was always considered a bit introverted, but kind-hearted and positive. However, after graduation, many began noticing serious changes in him. He became more withdrawn, communicated less, lost a significant number of friends, and stopped engaging in creative activities, though he still seemed harmless. By the time Jennifer met Jed, he had just started showing these changes in his character. The two young people had a lot in common. They worked together and spent time in the same social circles. It was here that many noticed that Jed seemed awkward in conversation. His jokes often came off as inappropriate, somewhat gloomy, and hard to understand. He also acted somewhat rudely, including toward Jennifer. There were no romantic feelings between them, but it was clear that the guy had feelings for her. As for Jennifer, it seemed that she had no intention of starting a relationship and wasn't interested in romance. She focused on her studies and had found a job. All of this took up nearly all her free time. One day during a workday, Jed came up to her and confessed his feelings, asking her out on a date. She once again repeated what she had told everyone before. She wasn't interested in relationships until she built her career and became financially independent. As it turned out, her acquaintance was not the type of person who could handle rejection. In his anger, the student struck his friend. A conflict arose, but they managed to settle it peacefully. They continued studying, like any other students from the same course, but kept their distance. Jennifer and Jed graduated in 2003. It was at this time that Jennifer received her degree in special education, while the would-be boyfriend earned his degree in English. Their friendly relationship was never restored, and in fact, they hadn't communicated much during their final years at school. However, this didn't upset Jennifer. She was even glad that their paths had diverged and would never cross again. After graduation, the protagonist returned to her family, found a job, and began saving money to buy a house, which had always been her dream. She was very goal-oriented and sought self-sufficiency. Unfortunately, her well-organized plans were interrupted by an old acquaintance. Somehow, Jed managed to find out the home phone number of the Paulson family. He made his first call 2 years after they received their diplomas. He said that he had served in the National Guard in Kuwait and had just returned from a combat zone. Jennifer politely chatted with him and hoped that Jed wouldn't call again. But from that day on, his calls started coming regularly. At first, Jennifer didn't pay much attention, thinking that he was just bored and calling everyone, including her. Then she started to get worried because Jed began calling her every day several times, which was very distracting and disruptive. She asked mutual friends, and it turned out that he wasn't calling anyone else, just her. This made her even more concerned. It seemed like he was obsessed with her, which was unsettling. Jennifer explained to him that there could be no relationship between them and asked him not to contact her again, but it seemed like he wasn't listening at all. Jed kept calling. Jennifer had to turn off her phone and hide from the persistent calls. Fortunately, her family supported her and helped her out. During this time, Jennifer's parents got divorced. Her father moved out of the family home and started living with a new woman. The news hit everyone hard, but her parents remained on good terms and continued to communicate as friends. Her father visited the children, and his new wife became close to the family, also becoming a welcome guest in their home. By the fall of 2006, Jennifer Paulson had finally saved enough money for a down payment on a mortgage and decided to buy a house. She found a suitable one a few kilometers away from her family. She was happy to finally gain the independence she had longed for. Moreover, she hoped that Jed's calls would stop after she moved. But how shocked she was when, just a few days after moving into her new house, she picked up the phone and heard that familiar, unsettling voice. She hadn't even had time to unpack and settle in, and everything started over again. Jennifer continued to ignore him, not answering the calls for several days, hoping it would cool off the persistent guy. But her enthusiasm didn't last long. After a while, the phone finally stopped ringing. Jennifer became anxious and called Jed back, trying to reason with him. Interestingly, when she did this, he wouldn't answer, but would call again persistently later. It all felt like some strange game, and suddenly it all stopped. The stalker stopped bothering Jennifer for about a year. We will return to this moment later to find out what was actually happening in his life during that time. During his absence, Jennifer had calmed down, thinking that Jed had left or found a new girlfriend. But then, the unstable guy called again and started talking as if nothing had happened, as though they had seen each other just yesterday. From that point on, the communication became continuous again. Jed's calls repeated about 10 times a day, sometimes more. This continued for several months before stopping again, this time for a long period. Such stalking repeated for several years, following roughly the same pattern. The next wave of calls from Jed began in 2008. This time, it was more irritating and frightening because Jed had become even more persistent. Jennifer didn't suspect how far things had gone, at least not until the stalker appeared at her workplace at the school. He simply passed by the office where she worked, then brazenly walked in. This became the most terrifying experience for the heroine of the story. Jennifer knew perfectly well that she hadn't told Jed where she worked, and she realized he was watching her. The mere fact that this strange man came to the school and was walking around among children terrified Jennifer. When she told her father about everything, he was fed up with the countless stalkings by the unstable guy. Kenneth got in touch with him by phone and demanded that Jed stay away from his daughter, or else there would be trouble. Of course, the young man didn't comply. Instead of disappearing, he sent Jennifer a gift to her workplace, a bouquet of flowers and a teddy bear, and then showed up in person again. This time, Jennifer spoke to him and asked him not to come to the school anymore, threatening that she would have to contact the police if the stalking didn't stop. She was genuinely concerned about his obsessive behavior, which had crossed all boundaries. Afterward, Jennifer informed the principal and staff at the school about the situation, as she was worried about the safety of the children. Everyone was notified and ready to call the police the moment this man showed up again at the school. Of course, that didn't stop the stalker. When he showed up once more, the police were called. The principal was very alarmed by the situation and even contacted Jed's commanding officer in the National Guard. This allowed them to learn that his military service hadn't been as honorable as he had claimed to Jennifer. The commander explained that the young man had been unstable from the very start, but still managed to serve for almost 2 years. During this time, he had started several fights, spat at a soldier, and even struck his superiors. Later, the aggressive guy was transferred to Kuwait, where his service ended without the honors he had told Jennifer about on the phone. In reality, the main reason for his discharge was his deteriorating mental health. It's worth noting that Jennifer had previously checked the stalker through various national databases. However, he was officially nowhere to be found. Learning about the concerning details of his history, Jennifer began to truly fear for her life. Therefore, in September 2008, she filed for a restraining order. The victim of the stalking detailed Jed's unstable behavior, his endless calls and troubling visits to her workplace. The former classmate would call her home and mobile phones up to 20 times a day, often even at night. Jennifer's application was approved. A restraining order was issued for her protection from stalking. The order meant that Jed was not allowed to approach, appear at her workplace or home, or be within 300 meters of her. From that moment on, Jennifer was ready to take action. Although the order itself couldn't provide complete protection, in case the stalking continued, she could rely on a more active police response, which somewhat eased her anxiety. The teacher was so frightened by Jed's behavior and the details of his history that she was prepared to hold him criminally accountable. Of course, the young man was also informed about the restraining order and the possible consequences of violating it. By this point, the girl was completely drained by the stalking. Signs of an emotional breakdown and stress had begun to show. Now, with this legal document in place, Jennifer felt more confident and gradually regained her composure, hoping that Jed would never again appear in her life. Jennifer was shocked when she saw in the rearview mirror of her car a car with Jed behind the wheel. She immediately called 911, but there was a misunderstanding with the dispatcher. The officer tried to figure out who the stalker was and whether he had physically attacked her. She completely ignored Jennifer's statement that there was already a valid restraining order against this person and that Jennifer was afraid of him. Finally, they were able to understand each other. The dispatcher suggested that she calmly drive towards the police station. As she passed by, the police were already there, ready, including in their cars. They were waiting for Jed, who was immediately arrested. That's how the guy ended up in an interrogation room. However, he denied all charges and refused to admit guilt in stalking. While awaiting trial, he was placed in jail, but with a bail of $10,000. Typically, bail for such charges is set at only $2,000. But the young man's behavior was so unpredictable and potentially dangerous that the judge decided to increase the amount fivefold. Unfortunately, this measure didn't keep Jed behind bars because he had the necessary amount of money. 4 days after his arrest, the young man was released. Only 3 days remained before the tragic conclusion of the story. When Jennifer and her whole family found out that the stalker had been released on bail, they all panicked. Jennifer's stepmother begged her on the phone not to return to her home, where she was alone and unsupervised, and not to go to work until the situation with the unstable young man was resolved. She asked her to stay with her family, where her relatives could offer her the necessary support. Jennifer decided to go to her mother's house. As soon as she arrived, her mother greeted her in tears. She admitted that she was afraid that Jed wouldn't even let her daughter get to her house. When the girl arrived, she was also moved to tears. But the first thing Jennifer wanted to do was pray for Jed. Even in such a situation, she remained bright and compassionate. Unfortunately, it didn't help. Jennifer followed her family's advice and stayed with her relatives. Her brothers were determined to protect their sister at home and planned to take turns standing guard. However, the girl didn't want to stay locked up all the time. She was determined to continue working and couldn't abandon her students. At 7:30 a.m. on February 26, 2010, 30-year-old Jennifer left for work. It was a Friday. She was preparing to conduct the first morning lesson for her class. That day, there were about 400 students at the school, ranging from first graders to fifth graders, along with teachers and staff. All these people had no idea they were in mortal danger. Since 5:30 a.m., Jed had been near the school. He had parked his car in such a way that it wasn't visible from the road. He was observing the approach paths to the school and waiting for his victim. Jennifer safely arrived at work, parked in her usual spot, got out, and walked toward the school. Everything seemed to be as usual. Jed also got out of the car so that she wouldn't notice him too early and immediately rushed toward the teacher. A few meters from Jennifer, the criminal pulled out a gun and shot her in the back. The girl screamed and fell onto the asphalt, after which the attacker shot her 7 more times. A man living across the street watched this horrific scene through his window. He was drawn by the woman's scream, but everything happened too quickly for him to do anything. The witness saw another random passerby run into the street where the shooting was taking place. Without hesitation, Jed pointed the gun at him, shot in the man's direction, but the man somehow managed to avoid the bullet. News outlets broadcasted an alert that there had been a shooting at the school where Jennifer worked. They urged local residents not to leave their homes unless absolutely necessary, as the criminal had fled. However, no details about the victims were available at that time. Jennifer's worried mother immediately called her father. The parents drove toward the school together. Until the last moment, they hoped this was false information and that Jed was not involved. They were horrified when they realized the stalker had indeed reached his victim. But the worst news was that Jennifer had passed away. The attack caused panic, allowing the criminal to escape in his car. However, several witnesses saw his face and clearly noted the car he used to flee. He was quickly identified, and it was clear that this was the same guy Jennifer had a restraining order against. Only 20 minutes passed before one of the patrol officers stopped Jed's car about 10 kilometers from the school where he had just killed Jennifer Paulson. The stop was not accidental, as the police knew they were dealing with the man who had committed a fatal shooting and nearly killed another man. The officers acted very cautiously during the arrest, but the situation quickly escalated into the worst-case scenario. Jed wasn't willing to surrender. He pulled out a gun and opened fire on the law enforcement officers. They were prepared for this turn of events and immediately returned fire. When the shooting ended, the criminal was dead. Miraculously, none of the officers were injured. However, the incident could have ended much more tragically. Several weapons were found with the stalker. It seemed he had expected a gunfight with the police. Among his weapons was a regular pistol, but he also had more powerful guns. If he had used them, things could have ended in even more bloodshed. Later, it was revealed that Jed was not killed by the police. It turned out that the patrol officers had shot him several times, but the injuries were not fatal. The 30-year-old Jed sealed his fate by shooting himself in the head. When the young man's family was notified of what had happened, they were all shocked, as they had no idea that Jed had been involved in such activities for many years. He was remembered as a good, creative guy, and when exactly Jed lost his mind and became a stalker and killer remained a mystery. His parents were convinced that military service had broken him. It was during this period that suspicious changes in his behavior began, but no one suspected what had become of the good old Jed. The criminal's family shared the Paulson family's pain. They made a public statement apologizing for their son's involvement in these tragic events. It was clear that they were genuinely shocked by the shooting near the school. His mother and father were devastated and felt guilty, as they could have prevented all of this if they had known about Jed's problems and had sought professional medical help in time. 4 days after the murder, over 1,000 mourners gathered at the church in the town. Everyone who cared came to bid farewell to Jennifer Paulson, from friends and family to the children in her class. She was loved by many. Unfortunately, among these people was one who could not control his emotions. Many of her students were upset by the tragic incident, as were Jennifer's relatives. Thanks to her help and support, they saw in her a real chance to succeed in life. For many, Jennifer became the only person who believed in troubled children and supported them. At Jed's funeral, there were only a few people from his close circle and a couple of friends. They weren't so much mourning the loss, but were shocked by the true nature of a person they thought they knew well. During the eulogy, his friends stated that he had no idea who was in the coffin. Apparently, he had never truly known that person. The Jed he knew, who he was friends with, wasn't capable of such an atrocity. A garden was created at the school in memory of Jennifer Paulson, which still exists today. About 50 students, mostly from her class, and their families were involved in its creation. Everyone grieved this tremendous loss in their own way. Of course, the family of the heroine could not come to terms with such a tragic end. The girl's father remembered how kind Jennifer had been. He saw only one way to honor her memory, and that was to help others. Kenneth Paulson spent many years working on legislation to provide more protection for victims of stalkers. He named his project the Jennifer Paulson Law. Its main goal was to accelerate authorities' response to such cases, so that they would not escalate as far as in the situation with Jed. The Jennifer Paulson Law also equated online stalking with real-life stalking. Furthermore, Ken wanted information about people prone to stalking to be made public, allowing anyone to check a suspicious acquaintance against existing databases. One reason for this initiative was that Jed had been involved in similar incidents before. If Jennifer had checked into him, she would have learned about his problems if such information had been made public. In fact, Jennifer became his second victim, the first girl he didn't kill. While he left Jennifer alone, he was fully focused on another victim. When things didn't go well there, he returned to Jennifer's life. However, he attacked another girl after receiving a restraining order. This happened in November 2008. Jed was charged with assault. The materials of this case were not made public. The first victim narrowly escaped death, though she suffered serious injuries. Despite this, the police did not stop the stalker, so he moved on and began stalking Jennifer again. In fact, it's hard to overestimate the relevance of this initiative, as at that time, the issue of stalking in the U.S. was quite pressing, just as it is now. Every year, around 3 to 4 million people over the age of 18 fall victim to stalking in the United States, and that's just according to official statistics. The real numbers are likely even more alarming. The only way to achieve legal action was through accusations and actual proof of domestic violence or sexual harassment. In other cases, authorities simply issued warnings. When Kenneth Paulson's initiative was finally signed and officially enacted into law, the man felt a sense of satisfaction. He sincerely believed that it would help hundreds of thousands of victims avoid a bloody conclusion to their stalking experiences. The man understood that this would not bring back his beautiful daughter, who left this world at the age of 30. Now Kenneth felt that his work in this area had not been in vain. If you liked my work, subscribe to the channel and support this video with a like. Let's discuss this story in the comments. Take care of yourself and your loved ones.